On December 2, 1941, a German motorcycle patrol reached Khimki village, 5 kilometers. That's all that separated them from the Kremlin. Through frozen binoculars, they saw Stalin's golden spires. They could count the onion domes. One soldier wrote home, "Mother, we can see Moscow. The war is almost over." 72 hours later, these same men ran for their lives. The temperature hit -40. They left everything behind: tanks, guns, wounded friends. Men who thought they'd won were now freezing to death in the snow. This is how 5 kilometers changed the world. June 22, 1941. Hitler unleashed hell. 3.8 million German soldiers crossed into Russia, largest invasion in human history. They moved like lightning. Minsk fell in 5 days. Smolensk in 3 weeks. By October, they'd captured 3 million Soviet prisoners, destroyed 20,000 tanks. The Red Army looked finished. Field Marshal Fedor von Bock commanded the Central Force. He wrote in his diary, "The enemy is broken. Moscow will fall within the week." Hitler went on radio October 3rd. "The Soviet Union will never rise again." October 2nd, they launched Operation Typhoon, the final blow. 1.9 million soldiers, 2,000 tanks, 14,000 guns, all aimed at Moscow. The plan was perfect. In 2 weeks, they trapped 670,000 Soviet soldiers at Vyazma and Bryansk. The road to Moscow lay open. German tank commander Heinz Guderian raced ahead. His tanks covered 200 kilometers in 3 days. Nothing could stop them. But something did stop them. Not bullets. Not bombs. Mud. October rains came early that year. Roads turned to swamps. Tanks sank to their turrets. Trucks disappeared completely. Horses drowned trying to pull guns through the muck. The Russians called it Rasputitsa, the time without roads. Guderian's diary, October 28th. "The mud is worse than the enemy. We're drowning in it." Therefore, when temperatures finally dropped and froze the mud solid in November, the Germans had lost precious weeks. And those weeks would cost them everything. November 7th, 1941. Snow fell on Red Square. Stalin stood on Lenin's tomb. German artillery boomed 40 kilometers away. He didn't flinch. Instead, he held a military parade. Tanks rolled past. Soldiers marched in formation. Straight from the parade, they went to the front lines. Stalin's message was clear. Moscow would not surrender. The Germans watched through binoculars, shocked. They expected panic. They saw defiance. Then the real enemy arrived. November 15th. Temperature, -20 Celsius. German soldiers still wore summer uniforms. High command had promised winter clothes. The clothes never came. Wilhelm Hoffmann, infantry private, wrote, "I wrapped newspapers around my feet. The paper turned to ice. Now I have no toes." Tank engines wouldn't start. Oil turned solid. Machine guns jammed. Frozen triggers broke fingers. Telescopic sights cracked. Radio batteries died. But the Germans kept attacking. They had to take Moscow before full winter hit. November 28th. Temperature, -30. German doctor Heinrich Hoppe recorded, "I amputated 60 frozen limbs today. Tomorrow will be worse." By December, frostbite casualties outnumbered combat wounds. 100,000 German soldiers lost fingers, toes, or limbs to the cold. The Soviets knew this cold. General Georgy Zhukov had taken command October 10th. He ordered his men, "Let winter fight for us." Soviet soldiers had warm clothes, felt boots, and fur hats. Their weapons used different oil that didn't freeze. Their tanks had wider tracks for snow. German soldiers started stripping dead Russians for clothes. Corporal Franz Bauer admitted, "I took boots from a dead Ivan." His feet were smaller than mine, but frozen feet are better than no feet. Therefore, as German forces made their final push, they weren't fighting one enemy anymore. They were fighting two, and the second enemy never slept, never retreated, never showed mercy. December 2nd, 1941, 2:30 p.m. Sergeant Klaus Müller's motorcycle patrol entered Khimki. They stopped at the train station. Through the falling snow, there it was, the Kremlin. Müller radioed headquarters. "We can see it. We can see Moscow." They'd made it. After 2,000 kilometers, after 5 months of blood and death, they could see their prize. But Moscow wasn't empty. It was a fortress. Every factory became a strong point. Workers welded tank traps from steel beams. Children filled bottles with gasoline for Molotov cocktails. Women dug anti-tank ditches in frozen ground. 800,000 civilians prepared to fight. The Germans hit 3 suburb fortresses, Tula, Klin, and Solnechnogorsk. In Tula, factory workers joined regular troops. Dieter Kraus, German infantry. Every worker had a rifle. They fought harder than soldiers. They were defending their homes. German tanks entered the city. Soviet workers dropped Molotov cocktails from factory roofs. 23 tanks burned in one street. Klin turned into a meat grinder. Every building held snipers. Every basement hid machine guns. Hans Weber, Panzer Crew. "We couldn't use our tanks. Too much rubble. Too many ambushes. We fought room by room, dying for each meter." At Krasnaya Polyana, Germans captured the estate where Tolstoy wrote War and Peace. 23 kilometers from the Kremlin, they set up artillery. They could shell Moscow's suburbs. General Wilhelm Ritter von Lieb noted, "We're so close. But the men are finished." German divisions were shadows. The 2nd Panzer Division had 30 tanks left from 260. The 87th Infantry, 1,500 men standing from 7,000. And then they heard train whistles. Not from ahead. From behind Soviet lines. Stalin's greatest secret was arriving. Fresh Siberian divisions. 250,000 men. Trained for winter warfare. Equipped with the newest T-34 tanks. Stalin had kept them hidden, waiting. His spy Richard Sorge confirmed Japan wouldn't attack Russia's eastern border. These troops were free to fight. General Konstantin Rokossovsky saw them arrive. They came off the trains singing, full strength, full equipment, ready to attack. Therefore, at the moment Germans could see victory. That victory was already lost. They just didn't know it yet. December 5th, 1941, 3 a.m., -40 degrees. German sentries heard it first, a low rumble, then louder, then deafening, Soviet artillery, thousands of guns opening fire. The ground shook, the sky turned orange. 1.1 million Soviet soldiers attacked. 7,000 guns. 1,000 aircraft. Fresh troops screaming "Ura!" as they charged through the snow. The German line shattered like glass. Private Ernst Buchner was eating frozen bread when Soviets overran his trench. They came from nowhere. White ghosts in the snow. We ran. Everyone ran. No German unit was ready. They had no winter positions, no fortifications, no reserves. They'd used everything trying to take Moscow. Now they had nothing left to defend with. Panic spread like fire. The Fourth Army abandoned their positions, left wounded men screaming in the snow. The Ninth Army dissolved into fleeing groups. Officers lost control. Maps were useless. Compasses froze. Radio silence. Nobody knew where anybody was. Field Marshal von Bock pleaded with Hitler, "We must retreat. Now. Or lose the entire army." December 16th. Hitler's response, "No retreat. Not one step back. Any commander who retreats will be shot. But the retreat had already begun. Nothing could stop it. Germans abandoned everything. 1,000 tanks, frozen solid useless metal coffins, 20,000 vehicles, out of fuel, buried in snow. Soldiers threw away weapons to run faster, left supply dumps burning, left field hospitals with patients still inside. Lieutenant Friedrich Kellner's diary, December 20th. This isn't retreat. It's collapse. The army is dying. The Soviets chased them relentlessly. T-34 tanks crushed fleeing columns. Cavalry units with sabers cut down stragglers. Ski troops appeared from forests, attacked, then vanished. Aircraft strafed anything moving on the roads. By January 7, 1942, Germans had been thrown back 100 to 250 kilometers. 250,000 casualties. Frozen, wounded, dead, or missing. Entire divisions ceased to exist. General Franz Halder, Chief of Staff, confronted Hitler. "We've lost 500,000 men since June. We cannot replace them." Hitler fired him. Therefore, the invincible Wehrmacht, the force that conquered France in 6 weeks, was broken at Moscow's gates. They would never fully recover. Moscow wasn't just a city. It was the Soviet Union's beating heart. 11 major rail lines met there. Cut those lines, the Soviet Union couldn't move troops, couldn't supply factories, couldn't feed its people. Moscow produced 10% of Soviet tanks, planes, and ammunition. Lose Moscow, lose the war. But the battle meant more than strategy. Before Moscow, the Wehrmacht had never lost. Poland conquered in 5 weeks. France, 6 weeks. Yugoslavia, 11 days. Greece, 3 weeks. The German military machine looked unstoppable. Resistance seemed pointless. December 5th changed everything. Winston Churchill heard the news in London. He told Parliament, "The Germans have been beaten. They can be beaten again." President Roosevelt watched from Washington. He saw the Soviets could fight, would fight, could win. American Lend-Lease aid increased tenfold. The psychological shift was earthquake level. Soviet soldier Ivan Kopets wrote his wife, "We chased them. The mighty Germans ran from us. I've never felt so proud." German Corporal Hans Roth wrote, "We thought we were supermen. Now we know we're not. We can lose. We will lose." December 7th, 2 days into the Soviet counteroffensive, Japan attacked Pearl Harbor. December 11th, Hitler declared war on America. He now fought on 2 fronts against 3 superpowers. Military historian John Keegan called it the most catastrophic week in German history. The numbers tell the story. In 3 months around Moscow, 1 million casualties total. Germany lost 250,000 men they couldn't replace. Lost equipment for 50 divisions. Lost their best commanders, fired or dead. Lost initiative forever. After Moscow, Germany never launched another successful strategic offensive in the east. Only retreats. Only defeats. Stalingrad. Kursk. Berlin. Soviet Marshal Zhukov said it simply. Moscow was where we stopped retreating and started advancing. We advanced all the way to Berlin. Therefore, those 5 kilometers, that tiny gap between German fingers and Moscow's throat, became the space where history pivoted, where Hitler's 1,000-year Reich began its 3-year death spiral. Helmut Hoffmann survived Moscow. Barely. 40 years later, he returned. Stood in Khimki where his unit saw the Kremlin. He cried, "I was 21. I thought we were liberating Russia. I left my friends frozen in these fields. For what? For nothing." 800,000 Soviet civilians died defending Moscow. Lyudmila Pavlichenko, female sniper with 309 kills, testified, Every German I shot, I thought of my brother. The Germans killed him at Smolensk. Moscow was personal. Hitler blamed everyone except himself. He fired 35 generals after Moscow. Blamed cowardice. Blamed defeatism. Never mentioned his greatest mistake, forbidding winter equipment because he thought the war would end before winter came. Wilhelm Keitel, German High Command, admitted after the war, Moscow broke Hitler. He was never the same. Never trusted his generals again. The Soviets learned different lessons. Stalin nearly destroyed his army with purges before the war. After Moscow, he listened to his generals. Let Zhukov lead. Let professionals fight. That change helped win the war. General Winter gets too much credit. Yes, Winter was brutal. But Winter alone didn't stop the Germans. Soviet blood stopped them. Soviet courage. Soviet sacrifice. Soviet strategy. Weather was a weapon, but people pulled the trigger. Modern historians calculated the moment. If Germans had taken Moscow, the Soviet Union might have collapsed. No Eastern Front means 40 German divisions freed for North Africa and Western Europe. D-Day might have failed. Atomic bombs might have fallen on Berlin, not Hiroshima. The Cold War might never have happened, or happened differently. All because of 5 kilometers. December 5th is now Day of Military Glory in Russia. Veterans gather at the monument in Khimki. They remember friends who didn't come home. They remember when Moscow stood alone against the darkness and won. The memorial's inscription reads, "Here in 1941, the fascist advance on Moscow was stopped." 5 kilometers. 3 days in December. 1.1 million Soviet soldiers saying, "Not one step further." That's how you change the world. The Kremlin's golden spires still shine today. They've seen Napoleon's retreat, Hitler's defeat, the Soviet Union's fall, and Russia's rise.